Well, thank you to everybody for joining us this evening. I will go ahead and introduce our guest speaker. He's on the board of directors for the New World Angels. He's a board advisor for Hospitality Technology Next Generation, former technology CEO, Tech Runway mentor board member, and perhaps most notably, not only does he possess the experience and the expertise, but based on my experience working with Ron and having him speak in other forums, not only can he can teach, mentor, and coach, which isn't always the case, believe it or not. So he's a really great
buyer beware.
Yeah, he's a really great resource to have, and I've been a part of a couple of mentor teams. He's a great coach, very insightful, and really helpful to a number of the ventures. So with that, I'll go ahead and kick it off, Ron, and you can tell us a little bit about your background and your story, and we'll sort of just go from there.
Sure. How long do we have today, by the way? Because I'll go for a long time.
I think we definitely have until 7:30 if we need it, or if we end up going a little bit shorter, we'll kind of have the first part really focused on your story and your background and some more general stuff, and then we'll transition and we'll have just the Tech Runway cohort so they can ask some real direct and applicable questions related to their ventures.
Okay. So, well, to start off, hi everybody, and glad that I have the chance to chat it up with you. I'm sure many of you, I can't see all of you, but I'm sure I know a lot of you. There's sort of a list of things that we can talk about today. And so there's one of them will be, I'll just give you my background, who I am and what I've worked on. And we can certainly spend time on everything that I did wrong as a CEO. So, and I have a list, so we can go one by one. The other way to look at this is, as Kevin had mentioned, I am a part of New World Angels, and so I'm looking at 20, 30 pitches a month, or requests for funding. Plus, I do that in some other venues, so I have a lot of opinions on what exactly is getting funded and why. And I actually wrote a blog post that actually has been pretty popular out. That's basically kind of going negativa and saying, why didn't you get funded and what did we look at that knocked it out? So I think that's one thing we could cover today. The other would be a little bit maybe on context, making sure that if you have a startup going on, that your head's in the right space as the founder or the CEO or something like that. So those are kind of three broad strokes areas that we can walk through. So first, the Rontero story. So, is everybody ready? It's dramatic. It's exciting. It's so
I certainly am.
So I'm a native of International Falls, Minnesota. So if you don't know where that is, just follow the weather. So, and I married South Florida. So, the story for me would be I started in IBM Labs as a software engineer. So I was a nerd, mathematics, physics. I saw somebody just noticed my f of x is the absolute value of x sign behind you, which those of you who know the math, it's always a positive number. So I came out of that. I went into IBM Labs. I worked on virtual machine paging algorithms, which are essentially the things that are moving things in and off of disk and memory, et cetera. Now pretty standard stuff. And with the new Apple M1 chip, moot, because so much motion is now so efficient. But I won't nerd out on you there. I went from there into product marketing and product management, which was essentially deciding what features to build and why and what order, what was the market justifications. And then also working a lot with some of IBM's large corporate customers to consolidate a lot of that. So moved from lab into that, and then from that into strategy consulting at Ernst & Young. So again, all focused on technology. That was, we have a new piece of technology. What markets should we go after? What features should we put in? So you can see a theme building here, right? And at that point, a couple of folks that I had started with at IBM formed a company. And one of them was my wife, by the way. So I've worked with my wife for 14 years. So I think I get a prize. And so that went out, and we grew that into across 40 countries, sold it to a publicly held corporation. It was a telecommunications product. And from there, I ended up being a public company VP because the acquiring company made me go along with the desks and the pencils. And having come out of that, I've turned myself into angel investor, an advisor, a mentor, a coach. I do some interim management. I still do consulting for telecommunications companies. Charter Communications was the largest one most recently, looking at their strategies for going after the enterprise business. So that is me. I really sort of I've really spent a lot of time talking about, sort of what did we do? How did we do it? What was the phases of our company? And so I'm very, very mindful of that story. So rather than jumping into that, one more thing on background. So our company, let me describe what the technology was, just so you have a sense, because you should really know my limitations. Anybody who's building a fashion line, anybody who's building the next generation of something that's not technology, you have to take and filter everything I say, because I have a strictly technological lens. But we had a piece of software that ran in the cloud eventually, and it was called a middleware. And it basically took, if you had a piece of software here and a piece of software there and a piece of hardware here and there, sometimes they needed to interact. We did all of that connectivity, if you will. But also what you found out in businesses, there were these features and functions between all of these platforms that this company didn't want to put into their product and that company didn't want to put in their product. So we sat in the middle and we filled the gaps. So we were features and integration middleware was the way to look at the company. And that turned out to be a big thing. You see a lot of that now. You see crypto companies that have an integration strategy. You've got all sorts of middleware products like If This Then That, if you've ever heard of that company. So we had it very specific into people that were reselling telecommunications services into companies. So that's sort of my world of nerdiness, if you will. One other thing, by the way, while I'm chit-chatting, because I can go on a long time. So possibly what I'll do here is I'm going to talk through the investing stuff first, and then we'll go kind of into running the companies and having invest in that. So maybe cover in that order. I guess the question I would have, if you have a question, let me put it this way: if you have a question, try to drop it into the chat room here. And so how many people are on? Like 50 people, yeah. So we can't really just shout out. So if you have questions for me as I'm going along, or things you want me to comment on, I have an opinion on everything. I'll leave it to you to decide whether or not I'm correct. So just drop them in there, or Kevin, if you want to interrupt me or do something like that.
Yeah, I'll monitor the chat, and I'll jump in here and there with some thoughts and some
color commentary.
Yeah. Just
nice.
Whenever you're not suspecting it, I'll just jump right in.
Let me go and let's do the investor thing first. So I'm going to make a rash assumption that everybody who's on this call has some interest in getting their business funded. And so let me just walk through a sort of a stream of consciousness. And I'm going to share a screen. Do I have share screen capability? We'll find out. I do. I think I do. And so this is a presentation that I've given a few times in a different couple of different contexts, and it's been pretty popular. I presume you can see it, right?
Yeah, it's coming through.
All right. So again, I'm part of New World, and I'll talk a little bit about what an angel syndicate is. Reese Williams, who's many of you know, was one of the founders of this organization. It's been around a long time, probably 15, 16 years at least. It's round numbers. It's about 75 high net worth people that all put their money in a pile and try to make investments. The group has done 19 companies has 19 companies in the portfolio right now, about $20 million invested in the last 6-7 years. We invest, this is always a founder's question. We invest in about somewhere between 1 and 3 out of 100 things we pitch. So, and this is what prompted what I'm going to walk you through as far as, why didn't we do the other 97, right? Could be we ran out of money, but there was usually another reason, and it was because we didn't buy the story, right? The way these kind of groups work, and again, we can have a lot of conversations about the flavors of groups and the types of investors, but I'm going to start this way. If you're going to go after investor money, there's a couple of things that you need to consider. And the first one is do you really need investors? And the reason I bring that up is customers, are your best source of money. I don't know if you've ever thought of it in this context, but getting money out of a customer has zero dilution of your ownership of the business. It has no strings attached other than making your product, of course, which you have to do anyway. And so to be very, very clear, in us growing our company, we didn't take any investor money. So here I am talking about investment from a guy who basically, dissed all the VCs and everything that tried to come at us. So the reality is sales revenue is your cheapest form of money. And so the real trick, what you need to do, and I'm going to come back to this, I think later, is you got to find the most desperate early adopters for your product and try to get them to prepay. So before we have this thing about why you got rejected by a VC, this is a path you need to spend time on to make sure that you in your own mind know that a hungry customer wouldn't actually fund this. And the way we did it in my company was we went to a couple large companies. One of them was Disney, by the way, and said, listen, here's our story. If you take this story, why don't you, we have 80% of the product, you need 20% of the product. Write us a big check now, and we'll give you the software free of charge for the next couple of years. And by the way, if we screw it totally up, we'll pay you back, right? But the idea is that we funded it without investment dollars. We funded it with customer dollars. Not easy to do. I just want to put it out there before we ever talk about any of this. So the other question you have to have is on whether even to do money at all is speed. And is there a competitive imperative that if you're looking at this saying, listen, I know there's 3 other people doing this and it's a race, right? If it's a race, then money makes sense. There's no virtue in just trying to bootstrap your way up. So the question number 1, customers. Question number 2, speed. Is there something here that's going to drive me forward that I have to go after? The other thing that you have to look at is the business model. So if you were to ask yourself a question, why are there so many angel investors around nowadays, and in tech especially? And the answer is that it's become a software as a services world, or a communications as a service, or manufacturing and distribution as a service, and So for those of you who haven't experienced it directly, software as a service is a deferred gratification plan. Right? Instead of getting all your money up front as if somebody bought something, it is, month by month by month. Well, what happens is you need infrastructure early to serve that kind of customer base, which means you are inclined, if you're a SaaS product, to have to go chase investment. Again, if you can get around it, don't do it. So the other question would be, financing structure. Debt is not a good idea. As Warren Buffett said, debt is the great accelerant. It accelerates you up, it accelerates you down with equal velocity. So you don't want to get too stuck in that. But there are 2 different ways to go after equity. You won't find, you'll find them both in the marketplace, but the reality is one is more appropriate for you at the end early stage. So one of them is equity based. I'm going to give you $1 million and I'm going to get a percentage of your company. The other one would be a revenue-based financing, which is a newer one, which is I'm going to give you $1 million and you're going to give me first dollar out of the company. You're going to give me a percentage of your revenue for the next 5 years. The latter one it's got goods and bads to it, right? On both cases. You won't use up your equity, but you will use up your capital. So you can't use it to grow because you're always paying off what you just did, right? And it's a little bit more expensive than a bank loan. So, and then what you end up doing is, with revenue, if you do it wrong, then you say, oh gosh, I can't grow fast enough to pay these guys back. So I got to go get equity anyway, right? Go get equity financing. So the other thing would be there's a couple instruments out there, convertible debt versus equity. And I don't know if we want to go into all of that, but there's a fair amount of nerdy. Some investors like one versus the other. They have different behaviors, and so I'll leave that for another day. Kevin, are there any questions on any of this? If it's popping up, I'll before I go.
Just whether or not they can get a copy of the slide so far.
It's $10 a slide. So this is my big, long, complicated. By the way, you notice I like wandering in my conversations, so this is like a wandering slide. So here's what I did. So I've been involved with New World Angels for a couple of years now. I went back to every single company that didn't make it to our Shark Tank, right? And actually, some of the ones that came to the Shark, we have a screening Shark Tank, and then the one with all the members in it. Said, I wonder why they didn't make it. So it turns out I love Evernote, my favorite product ever. And I take notes from every single one, and I was keeping score. Quite accidentally, I was just, so I went back through their submission, and I went back through this, and I just did hash marks, right? So why did we cut you so early and really didn't give you a hearing, a serious hearing? So here we go. So one of them for the early no's was team. And this idea that, listen, your team, you ran a bagel bakery, and now you're doing satellite science, right? That kind of problem. So there was not enough domain knowledge in the room for us to feel comfortable that you had it put together. There was one other aspect of team. You're a single founder. And that's the, to use I use the Florida analogy all the time, but you were hiking in the Everglades and got eaten by an alligator, or swimming at the beach and got eaten by a shark. When you're a single player in what is ultimately a team sport, that's a risk factor for investors. So you may not be ready enough, you may not be this and that. So it doesn't mean we won't invest, right? But do you have the right domain knowledge, and is it shared in some way? One of the things that I've long used as a test of companies coming in and pitching is, who are the founders, plural. My favorite is an externally focused founder, somebody who is, in effect, talking to customers and getting market feedback, and an engineer or a maker who's making stuff. Best possible combination. Front of house, back of house, right? Because those two can put in a lot of sweat equity into a business to get it going. And so a team mix is, again, a reason it can be either for you because you've got a ton of it, domain experience, or it can be a negative and it's there. The other thing that would be, if I kind of go around counterclockwise a little bit, is too early. So you come to us with a great PowerPoint presentation, fabulous vision, no prototype, no minimum viable product, no beta, no path to those, or maybe some vision to those, etc. The thing to know about investors is, listen, we're investing in the execution of an idea, and you better have a plan for execution. So idea matters, but it's the first 10 minutes or the first 15 minutes of a conversation to say, I can get to this idea in my head. How do you make it real, right? So and we'll kind of get into that from a founding standpoint if you want to talk a little bit about kind of starting with iCore going forward. But that's one that'll knock you out, is that it's too much vision and not enough practicality to say that this can happen. Valuation is actually, let me come back to valuation and do more financial stuff later. The other one that we notice is not better enough, right? And I use the example of online banking all the time, which is, gosh, to change my online bank, I have to go into my online payment system and pull everybody out and put them into the new bank. That's a speed bump. It's an exit cost, right? So you better have a really good story at the top end of that to say, this new bank is so good that I'm willing to go through all the drama, right, and all the hassle. You see lots and lots of companies coming out, and you need to make sure that you are not falling victim to this. You're a flavor of something that already exists. Because flavors are not cool. At the end of the day, they're not investable, they're too narrow, and you could get squashed by other people. So we're very, very sensitive to the idea that you are Uber for pencil delivery, right? It's like, what? It's just too, it's a great foundation idea, too narrowly applied. And it's not enough to motivate somebody to say, I'll get my pencils through, through Uber. So that kind of idea. The other one would be the closely related to it is no blue ocean, which is just above it. And this is, you're a new captain in a small boat in big waves in the shipping lanes, right? And by the way, you don't have a lot of gas, otherwise known as fuel, otherwise known as money. And so you're sitting there and you're going, okay, you are sailing right into mainstream technologies and a lot of the overlap. And that ends up being a risk factor that an investor is going to look at and say, yeah, boy, couldn't you find something that's out here? A lot of this, by the way, has to do with how you define your business, not necessarily the reality of it. But if you're looking to wedge in between, 5 other companies or 10, a company or 2 is evidence that you may be onto something really interesting. Sort of a lake full of boats is indication that maybe you're too late, especially if there's people in the market. And so we're going to look at that. The related thing, and it kind of is the not bitter enough, is the total addressable market is too small. It's called a TAM. And we're going to say, gosh, how many people out here, if you want to sell to hotels, there's 50,000 hotels. Okay, that's pretty good. But each hotel is going to pay 8 cents a month. Okay, 50,000 times 8 cents. If you sold every hotel in the country, that's not so big. And that leads to something that's a very fundamental issue for you, is you could have a great company that's going to make some solid money, right? But you may not be investable, because what I just described, 50,000 customers at 10 cents a month, is not big enough for returns, risk-adjusted returns. So if you're going to be a small set of customers, you better have an extremely high price, right? And if you have a huge number of customers, you can have a lower price. But it's going to, what am I doing? I'm getting to a revenue number. And I'm looking at total addressable market, not in terms of customers, but I'm looking at it in terms of revenue and multiples of revenue over time. How are we doing, Kevin?
Great. Everything is wonderful so far. I think this is particularly relevant. I'll just hit on a couple of things I noticed as you go through these different topics. Is some of these things might be fundamental attributes of your business model, and you may have to think really hard about, like, hey, my company may not be investable. Can I go one of these other routes? Whereas some of the factors are much more within your control. You can go out and find someone with appropriate domain experience. You can try to build a team that is going to be very attractive to investors. Whereas if your business model or your market is just an uninteresting size, that might be okay, but realize you may not be able to get investors. Same thing with prototypes and path to prototypes. These are things you can work on to try to set yourself up as more investable, whereas some of the other factors are a little bit tougher. So I just wanted to make that kind of distinction as they might think about, hey, maybe I can fix this up, versus some things that are really harder constraints.
Yeah. One of the things, kind of playing back to my history as a CEO, is we always had, there is always more stuff to develop than you could possibly, market requirements are always coming at you. So-and-so had an idea, make this green, not blue. Your challenge always is what are you going to do, and how do you take that request and abstract it? Meaning, so I'll use hotels versus B&Bs, right, or something like that. And so the hotel has a requirement. Yeah, it seems pretty good. You could develop that piece of software, and again, understand I have a software bias. You can develop that piece of software precisely for that hotel, or you could stay back and go all the way back to the requirement and say, why are they asking for that? And I wonder, if I actually contextualized the requirement far enough back, that actually I can hit a whole bunch of segments, right? And so what you're going to find out, especially if you have a technology product, it's very easy to listen to opinions about new features. There's a name for it in product management. It's called creeping featurism, which is you're creeping down the road of adding features, but it's also locking you into a segment that you can't, now if you wanted to go from Airbnb or Airbnb type of stuff to Marriott, you can't make the switch because you built stuff too far down into the product line and you didn't differentiate it by modules or something like that. So there's a big thing on TAM, and to your point, Kevin, the idea of not getting stuck is in these things and defining your business carefully is a big deal. And by the way, and coming back to an investor's going to say, well, this layer of technology could be used in a lot of places. I get it. You had to do a model for bed and breakfast or a module for bed and breakfast over here, but we're okay because I see the broader use. But if you had said, I have a B&B bed and breakfast product, everybody's going to go, how big is a bed and breakfast world? Oh, there's 10,000 of them. There's something. And they all pay a nickel. Oh, no. But you say, well, anybody who rents anything to anybody, oh, okay, that's big. So again, how you do your product management really matters there. Anything else on that, Kev?
Yeah, there's a couple questions coming in. Here's a really good one. It's about what you typically use to assess the ability to exit an investment, right? So this has to do with kind of the zombie risk of it's a great successful business. It's wonderful for the founder. It's a great lifestyle, but there will be no liquidity event ever.
You've read my stuff, haven't you, Kevin?
Well, I've, early in my career doing some advising with some startups, they'll offer me some equity and it becomes readily apparent that, that 3 to 5% will never, ever be liquidated. And I'm not going to force them to buy me out. So it's just going to go.
It's a dividend stock.
Turn into nothing.
So here is from an investor standpoint. Again, I'm sort of in investor context here, talking to each of you as founders, but your number one risk in these companies is not going out of business, is that they just linger, right? And so it turns into your best case in that situation is a dividend stock. They give you, basically a dividend off of profits every year. But you really took on a lot of risk to get a dividend stock. You can go out into the stock market and buy IBM, right? So it's really not a great story. And so investors are gonna imagine what an exit looks like right up front. You have to, and they're also going to test your interest in exit, because an investor's coming in, and investors have this idea that they're going to put money in, they're going to get a multiple of the return for the higher risk, and then they're going to go look for another early stage company. They're not going to, generally they may follow you into more investment rounds, but they're looking for clues. And it's called a zombie company from what investors call it, is if it's just sort of, it's going along, it's making money, everybody's making a good career, yay, right? And so you get some reactions from folks that, from investors, if they sense that is your life story. This is going to be, and one of the ones I actually just did an interview a couple of days ago, a couple of weeks ago, I guess, but, where, one of my tests is when somebody pitches and says it's my company and my company and my company. And it's like, well, okay, I get that, but there's other people on your cap table, and then also I'm going to be on the cap table, and I'm going to be looking for words like, at minimum, the company, but maybe even our company if there's a lot of money in it. And how do we, and so there's a lot of founders drinking their own bathwater in that, and you need to be careful about it because that's all speaking to exit. And so, just trying to think of what else on that, but that's a very big thing, and that's actually a bigger risk than you failing, right? The other big one is you get tired and decide you need a real job, you just need a salary and medical or something. But the reality is that investors have to reflect on this with you, and so yeah, to your point, Kevin, that's a good one.
Yeah, so a lot of this is really about kind of mitigating risk. And for those who are really kind of new to this, it's because it's extremely risky. Even a sophisticated investor knows kind of the odds and knows the outlook is very risky, hence the nature and the potential opportunity for a greater than average return, but the single founder, the no validation. So we've got a question here about traction. When do you see a company is saying, hey, they do have traction? What kind of monthly recurring revenue? Do you typically want to see in a SaaS like B2B company? When do you think it might be an appropriate time from a revenue perspective and a customer perspective where they might be better suited for an investor?
So let me take a long run at that and answer there, because there's no absolute answer. So every group is going to have a different point of view on when in a cycle they want to invest. I think I have a slide. Is some folks are just going to say, I need to see that you have a minimum viable product and a first dollar revenue, if it's software, right? Others will say, listen, you're a good founder, you know the space, I'm willing to, pre-product you, right? So the answer to the question ultimately is you need to go out and start looking at funding sources and figuring out which ones are basically inclined for your stage of company. For in the case of New World, we are very much New World, and we can get into it, but we're a syndicate. On balance, the folks in New World love to see an MVP, love to see a customer. And so the way to step back from that is the process of getting an investor is one of de-risking the investment for the investor, right? If, all the way back to my, you had a PowerPoint vision presentation, that's pure risk. If you can get somebody to invest, other than your mom, that's going to be your most expensive money ever. But every time you go forward and you say, okay, I have a product, I have a beta customer, I have a revenue customer, the customer doesn't hate me. Every step you take is in effect putting you in a stronger position to argue for protecting your equity in the company. So let me put it this way. Let's suppose you have $1 million company for simple math. And you want, meaning you've established a value on it, right? By establishing the value on that company of $1 million is, if I was going to give you $100,000, I'm going to take, if it's just a vision, right? I'm going to take 25% of the company, right? Maybe more. I'm going to be pretty tough. If you have a product or something else, maybe down to 20, then maybe down to 15, maybe down to 10. Depending on how sophisticated you are in the driver's seat. The further you can take this without seeking funding. Your first question should always be, should I even get funding? How far can I take it before I have to? And then back to my earlier point, the related point would be, how far can I take it? But leavened by the fact that, is there somebody going to outrun me because I'm going too slow? Meaning I just needed more fuel. So there is no good answer other than you will see funds. Some of them they call themselves seed funds, but they don't want anything that's when you peel it back, what kind of company are you interested in? And it's going to be the ones that they feel that they can understand and they can see the risks. This is risk-adjusted capital. Higher risk, more expensive. So can you de-risk it?
So here's another good question that probably won't have a hard and fast answer either, unfortunately, but as a seed investor or a New World Angels, speaking from the kind of the aggregate, what sort of timeline are you typically looking for in terms of a potential exit? And again, I know it's not going to be, well, we want 5 years and 6 months. And
I want 10 times return in 6 months or less. Yes.
Yeah.
So that's it.
So what do you really?
And then from there, we can talk.
I guess a better question is, how long is too long? You look at it and it looks doable. It looks pretty attractive, but maybe you just sit back and say, yeah, but it's going to take too long. I
mean, you have to appreciate an angel investor's, I'll call it guts for lack of a better word. Because the answer is typically 3 to 5 years. I mean, you have to be sort of mentally prepared for 3 to 5 years, so even 7 sometimes. So your money's tied up. It's illiquid. There's no way out. So that's why you get a lot of questions from them. Is like, who are you, or how committed are you, et cetera. So I would say that, yeah, I mean, that's where they're going to have their set. And so they're going to look, they don't want you to be a zombie, but they want you to make progress. And you should have in your mind a defined exit. That's probably the biggest thing. And if it's 3 or 5, so be it. Now, there's 2 different flavors of this. So if you are an angel syndicate, and maybe it's a good chance to talk about what's the difference between an angel syndicate and excuse me one second. Probably a little later. Sorry. Where was I? Oh, so syndicates versus venture funds. They are different. And so the way a syndicate works, if you came to New World Angels, you're going to come through our process. You pitch to the members, go through some due diligence. We go, hey, we like this. What happens is you pass the hat amongst all the investors. They throw the money in, okay? And then we give it to you. And now let's set the timer 3, 5, 7. Sooner is better than later, et cetera. But there's no hard endpoint. There's no escape for anybody. It's a marriage without a divorce, okay? So that's that. The other side of it is a venture fund. So a venture capital fund, if you're a high net worth person, you're going to go to a VC and they're going to want you to become what's called a limited partner. Limited partner says, why don't you give me, pick a number, $250,000. We're going to put it in a pile. And we as professional investors are going to go trotting around looking for all of you talented founders. And we're going to do some investing. And oh, by the way, we promise at the end of 5 or 7 years to give you your money back plus a return. So now it doesn't always happen this way, but that creates a little bit different dynamic with this whole exit thing and when you want your money out. Now, a lot of times they'll roll you into new funds, but a lot of times they'll say, you know, I kind of lost patience with this deal. Underwater basket weaving is not the whole idea that I had thought it was going to be. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to force a sale of your assets or your company because they came in with some preferred rights, right? So VC is a little bit different dynamic. I'm not saying they're going to do it, but they have time frames by which they're trying to define returns. That's a little bit different than a bunch of angels. The other difference, by the way, is the angels will probably want a little bit more hands on your company. Like we have 75 members. Some of them know healthcare, some of them know telecom, some of them know this, some of them know that. And so they also have resources that have more opinions about your running. So that'd be the dynamic on that side. So
I'll jump in too with something, because some of this, depending on your level of experience, may be a bit disappointing from an entrepreneur's perspective.
Oh, a failed entrepreneur.
But let me answer.
Smarter though, smarter.
Yeah. So, but when you think about these VC funds and family offices, you mentioned that kind of like they have a deadline timeline. They also have these same constraints for deploying capital. So, I mean, I run into folks that, you know, I run into entrepreneurs, there's never enough investors, there's not enough investors, there's not enough capital. But on the other side of that same coin, there are certain types of investors that say, hey, I can't find enough investments. We need to deploy this last 2.5 million, you know, in about
Soon.
this timeline. It's not hard deadlines in most cases. Sometimes it is harder, and they are actively looking as they get towards the end of that fund and the end of that timeline. So that's kind of can be a potential positive thing.
Yeah, they're trying to get in as many investments early as possible. You know, because if you're in the, I mean, actually, this is a very, very good question when a VC is going to talk with you and say, okay, what's your fund and when is it, you know, when's the end of the fund? It doesn't mean anything, I mean, because they could transition you into a next fund, but that is an important milestone for funds. So if it's a 7-year fund and you're coming in at year 5.5, I can tell you there's going to be discussions at year 5.5 and then at year 7 about what to do with you, right? Cut our losses and run or roll you over. And it's a potential discontinuity. So that's the way to look at it. It doesn't make VCs good or bad. It's the structure of their financing.
What are your kind of, and this will be a real vague question, so good luck, but what
I'm
are
good at
your
vague
kind
answers. So this is good.
feelings on, or not feelings, your experiences, your perspective on the South Florida technology investment kind of scene, context, ecosystem, where it is today, where it's been, and where it might be going?
Well, I first started in South Florida, with IBM, which is the old T-Rex. That's actually where I met Dina, my wife, and my CTO. We were all IBM Labs folks. And I would say back then, this was a real estate and oranges state. It was not a tech state. I would say that's profoundly transformed and getting more so. I have a lot of friends in Silicon Valley some notable ones who that have all moved out of California, and some have gone to Miami. And so I think that, you know, it's been easy to beat up on the state for you know, funding reasons, because a lot of the investors, and even in angels, they're not technology folks. But right now in New World, starting with me, I'm a pure play tech guy, right? Don't bring me shoelaces. I don't know what to do with it, right? But we also have, you know, again, we've got consumer products people in the group. So I think it's profoundly transformed. I think that what you don't have are the, I'll call it some of the swing for the fence money. So you don't have, where you get into a little trouble in Florida is on sort of the mid-stage, late stage, is a little challenging if you're trying to stay in state with it. But, you know, my attitude is, you know, money's a commodity. I mean, you know, so, you know, whether it's coming out of this fund or that or whatever. But I would say that between two things have happened in the state that I think have really made a huge difference. And one is, I think there's more investors that are experienced business people, and the other is that there's these incubators all over the place. Some of them good, some of them bad, whatever. But you're getting more folks with eyes on business plans, and so that's a net good.
All right, I've got a related question that well, I'll just kind of send it to you. In some instances, you're down here because you do have a lot of wealth. I've known some entrepreneurs who have found some investors that are not accustomed to angel investing and have not typically done angel investing, but maybe it's a personal network, a family friend, but they kind of frame themselves as investors, but they don't have this experience or specific knowledge. What are your thoughts on taking on one of those investors and maybe some of the potential pitfalls or benefits, if there are any?
Well, listen, you know, if your business fails, you want to piss off your mom. I mean, at the end of the day, right? So, you know, if it's going to be family members and extended friends and family round, there's even a name for this in Ventureland called Friends and Family Round. You know, you've got to be able to, there's a gutsy part of this, and the gutsy part would be, if this goes down, have I set the expectations with my family that it's a high risk investment? So there's that. The other thing you see a lot of is, you know, it's sort of like, you know, Uncle Joe invested and I didn't really put the paperwork in order for that to happen. And now Uncle Joe wants his money back and it's going to get nasty. And so I guess a couple of things. Number one is whatever you do has to be straight legitimate, straight up legitimate. And you have the right kind of legal support to, in effect, issue equity and do all that other stuff. The other way to do it, and this sort of actually is my small dollar ask thing down in the corner of my presentation there, is friends and family are going to come in typically with smaller amounts in early blocks. And so you really need to be, the reason you don't want to do lots and lots of little dollar amounts is ultimately it doesn't get you to milestones, right? It's, I need another month of somebody paying my rent, right? So what happens is investors begin to look at this in little bits and pieces. You gave Uncle Joe 5 shares, then 10 shares, and 15 shares, and you got a really messy cap table. And so it's better to say, hey, Uncle Joe, why don't you join New World Angels? Let's get this group motivated, and let's come in with 18 months of financing. Boom, and we're going to use that financing to get to our minimum viable product. So you're going to see, like with New World, our ideal investment is $500,000, right? Why? Now, it could be never less than $250,000. Why is that? Because we kind of figured out one day that nickel dime. And if you come to me personally and say, do you want to give me a little bit of money? I'm going to go, no. I want to come in with a big bunch of people, and I want to have a set of milestones laid out that, and by this financing gets you to. So I love friends and family. It keeps you alive and afloat, but you know, that's going to run out, and you're going to need somebody serious to come in on milestones for most product stories. I don't know if that answered your question, but I actually danced around it some. But
no, I think it was pretty good. There's another one in the chat I'm going to take for the next section, which we'll get to in the next probably 5 or 10 minutes here. We'll take a little break and shift over. There's one in the chat that I can touch on. It has to do with social impact and impact investing, which is consistently evolving, and the questions about like, what are those investors looking for? And in my experience, I'll just kind of reiterate all the things that Ron's gone over here. I know some social impact entrepreneurs who have social ventures say, you know, look how important this is. Look at these communities we're helping. Look at this, and this. They are still investors. They are not donors. These are not nonprofits. They might be B corporations, but all these things that Ron talked about, they likely still want to exit. They do care about the social impact, but they still want, you know, the right founders, the right product, the right evaluation, some blue ocean, like all these factors still really playing a role. It's just that extra little kind of bonus, which in some ways can help you, right? Because it's a smaller pool. You're not necessarily competing with every venture. But then again, you know, there are a lot of ventures competing for those funds, and you will see VC funds and angels that, you know, invest in very specific sectors or specifically in impact investing. But at the end of the day, it's still viewed as a typical investment.
Yeah. So, you know, everybody, you know, there's an old saying, you know, watch what people do, not what they say, right? And this is the virtue signaling problem with a lot of this, right? So I'm yet to meet an investor that could not see a sustainable business story. I mean, listen, Tesla has a social component. It's the environment. So listen, you need to have a strong sustainability argument. It can't be, I'm going to take take money, you know, into this company forever because it's good. It's a good. You know, the thing to go after, if I were to be very precise about this, is I've seen a number of these social benefit type of stories that come in. They all have a basic problem. So let's suppose, let's imagine a restaurant, right? And so they have some sort of technology that's going to help a restaurant recycle food. I'm making this up clearly. And so it's going to be great, and the restaurants would buy it and they'd recycle food. That's going to cost them money. So let's step all the way back. Social benefit. Oh, it's going to reduce food waste, or it's going to but it's going to cost the restaurant money. So what you've done is you've socialized the value, right, of societized the value of this solution, but you've specifically burdened the restaurateur with the cost. So you see a lot of these that have a systemic societal value over here and a cost that will never get it deployed. Now, so what do you do? In the case of Tesla, what they said is, I'm going to give you a tax rebate, right? So when you bought a Tesla car, I'm a Tesla fan. Wait. They basically found a way to say, let me ease the cost, the upfront cost of that. So from an investor, you've got to be able to say, this product stands on its own right. It's by its nature has a social benefit, right? But on its specifics, it can be driven. This is, by the way, something that Elon Musk understood profoundly well. The dude gets an A. So.
Yeah, and I'd also say the other thing that might be attractive in that sector specifically is if it drives sales, right? It is why the people buy the products. A couple of FAU alumni I'll highlight are the founders over at 4Ocean, you know, and they sell bracelets and all these auxiliary products. But why do people buy the products? Because they'll take a pound of trash out of the ocean when you buy a product. So it literally drives sales. It does its own marketing. It has a viral coefficient. It does a lot for the business model, as opposed to something where you have something and then you're like, and plus we'll donate to this, and we'll use recycled food. And it's kind of just thrown in there. Maybe it helps people. Maybe it's a net benefit, but it doesn't drive sales. And it doesn't it's also not a standalone product, as Ron already highlighted.
Yeah. So value must accrue to the person that's financing this. So if it's a societal benefit, sorry, the government's going to have to fund it, right? So yeah, that's the way it's going to go. So.
Okay, I think we're going to take a break here in just a minute, but Ron, anything else you want to hit on for the whole group before we transition into some more specifics with the Tech Runway cohort?
Yeah, maybe can I just hit a couple of things that I think are pretty important. The scale math on the organic growth is organic growth. Look at it this way: is you can come to me and say, I have a new app. I'll use that app as an example. I have a new app and I have 50,000 downloads. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in, of the 50,000 downloads, how many times a day are they using it, right? And how much revenue did you have to spend in order to get those things in? And what's the churn? And we'll come back to some of those things. I think maybe it's on a more operational focus. But the market pull is better than anything else. But customer engagement, the comment that's right above it, purchase is not usage. We get a lot of people that say 50,000 people downloaded my app and no reference as to how many people used it. You know what I think? I don't think anybody's using it. So they're doing the wrong measurement. They're like driving the car and looking at the tachometer, not the speedometer, right? So you need to make sure that that is something that's firmly in your mind. From a scale math standpoint, one other back of envelope thing, we can cut it. When it comes to scale math, I personally always look at unit gross margins. So, and this comes back to what we were just talking about too on that social benefit thing. I have a customer, they're going to spend $1. Are they going to make $1 or $2, or are they going to save $2, or what happens here on a unit basis, right? And then the next point being, how much money did I have to spend to actually get that $1 of revenue? So the reality is that if you spend more money in sales, and this has a lot to do with sales channels, if we're looking at this and saying, you know, you're trying to do charging stations for cars, and it's costing you this much to put it in, and you're not getting it back over 9 years, right? Or it's taking you 8 years to get it back. Or, you know, we're looking at those kind of numbers and saying, forget all of your forecasts and your spreadsheets that have the revenue going up like this. Show me one customer and show me the economics, and show me the economics and how you got the customer. So pretty big deal. And if you can't pass that test, there's a lot of other things, network effects and, you know, exceptions to this. But if you can't pass that kind of test, you're not going to get very far from an investment standpoint. Or if you do, you know, take the money. So